Hello and welcome to an Everyday Canines video. In this episode we're looking at tight turning exercises, how they can affect your dog's fitness and why it's important to know what you're doing with them and not to overdo them. So when I'm talking about a tight turn, what I mean is when we ask our dog to do the wing wraps. Okay, can you go loop, loop? So that's a tight turn. That wasn't very fast because she was going like that, but that's a tight turn. Now what sometimes we can do is we might have our wings set up and we ask our dog to go around it repeatedly. Or we do a lot of work doing loops and checks or whatever our word is before we start doing anything. We see it as a warm-up exercise. It's not a warm-up exercise. Your dog should be warmed up before you start doing tight turns. The reason for this is your dog actually has to do a lot of flexing to do the turn. If we imagine our dog is coming in, we've got to do a tight 360, and especially if we're going to ask them to do it repeatedly, as our dog comes over, I mean, it's even harder with the bar and even harder if you've got it on full height for a dog that's large. But say they're coming over here, they've got to turn the shoulder, they've got to turn that back leg to get the tightness, they're going to be pushing and powering. And if we ask them to do that repeatedly with the jump, they've got to do that several times. That is a strain on the body, and your dog needs to be warmed up before they do that. Because if you do that as the warm-up, you're not helping your dog. Same applies why I don't do tight turns as warm-up. My dogs can do tight turns, but I don't do those as a warm-up because, again, it's a strain on the muscles, strain on that spine, it's strain on the neck. When I'm doing things like tight turn training, and I do tight turn training, Sparrow, can you stop doing the round? I do it after I've done some warm-ups. So I might have my dogs, I always walk my dogs before I train. I make sure they've walked. I make sure they've had a run around. I like to do some straight exercise to make sure they're all stretched out, but in a natural way. Then when I get onto tight turn training, then they're already ready for that exercise. Their body's already flexed and ready to go, and then we can start doing tight turn. I avoid doing repeated turns around an object of a wing, though I do it on things like cones and stuff and on big barrels for hoopers, but I tend to avoid doing too many repetitions because, you know, again, it is tighter. If I was going to do multiple turns on a wing, I wouldn't have a pole there because, again, that's an extra difficulty we're putting in there. And I would really be thinking about what I'm doing. And we try to avoid doing too many repetitions. Equally, I would always make sure I do even numbers on both sides. So that I'm not always doing lefts, I'm not always doing rights. Because obviously if you constantly turn that side, it's an uneven stretch. Whereas if we do some on that side, we're evening ourselves up. It's a bit like if you're ever doing, I don't know, forms of physio for yourself or stretches for yourself, you always exercise evenly. Because if you don't, you get lopsided and that puts strains where you shouldn't be. You've got one side tighter than the other. If you do yoga or anything like that, you always exercise evenly. And this is the same. And I think people don't realise how much of a strain tight turns are on a dog's body. And they think of it, oh, it's just turning in a circle. It is a tight strain. If I show you, I mean, Sparrow doesn't turn so tightly because, come here, because she has early takeoff syndrome. She just doesn't turn tight, but Swift does. And so when you look at how tight Swift is going to turn around this wing, I think, okay, ready, Swift, loop, loop, loop. Now she was quite slow, but look how tight she was. Good girl, Sparrow, come here. And you think how tight she had to do. Well, should we try you and show you the difference? Because you won't do it as tight, but you're still going to be putting a lot of strain because you'll be faster. Swift, come here. Sit. Wait, Sparrow. Okay. Loop, loop, loop. Good girl. Now you can see with Sparrow, because she's good girl Swift, because she was putting a bit more speed into it, Swift's a bit more sensible. But because she's putting a bit more speed on it, I could see how she dug into that corner to get round. Do that again, I'll show you. Okay. Sit. Wait. Sparrow. Loop, loop, loop. I can see how she's digging in there. Now you think her legs are going like this to push her around. Her back legs are doing something similar. That's a strain on the body, that's a strain there. And it's the reason I don't use this as a warm-up exercise. If I'm warming up my dog, I'm going to be doing straight jumps, and then and doing other exercises first before I even go. I won't be considering those. Something I do, cold muscles. So for the sake of evenness, we better do check, 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 check. Good girl. Do you want to do it too swift? Swift. Oh, you're going to go around that way, are you? When you're training your tight turns, limit how many you're doing. And always think about your wing size. If you're using very small, if you're using a stick in the ground jumps, so they are literally just that. For a start, you're teaching your dog to turn tighter than you would in competition. Secondly, it's going to be even more strain on the dog's body to achieve that, because they're going to have to really stretch to do it. So we always want to work on a wing where you've got a bit more space. We don't actually want our dogs to turn too tightly on a course, funnily enough, because too tight can potentially take away all their speed. And also, if the dog turns too tightly, something like a backside, what they can actually do is they actually don't take the pole correctly, and that's when they can drop a pole. So it's actually sometimes better for them to pull out a bit and do a nicer curve. Another thing to bear in mind. So why do you see these things like wing shapers, or people put cones there or stuff? Because they actually want the dog to turn nicer. So my basic thinking here is, as we're now building our dog back up to fitness, I know what a lot of people are going to do. They're going to go in their garden, set up a jump and do wing wraps repeatedly and go, yeah, I'm building up my dog's fitness. Don't. That is not a way to build up your dog's fitness. Yes, of course, you're going to practice them at times, but don't do that repeatedly every day, or use it as an exercise to them before you start training something else. It is not a warm-up exercise. It is something you're going to do when your dog's muscles are warm up, and you're going to limit it, much like weaves. So that's my thinking on tight turns, and I hope that makes sense. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you have, you might subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can check us out on Facebook and Instagram. And I wish you many years of happy jumping with your dogs.